So last week we talked a lot about building relationships as part one of our stewardship series. And when you build relationships, right, you share things with people. So why is it that we shy away from sharing our faith stories? You know, maybe we think we don't have a big enough story to share or something. But think about the other things that we do share. Right? We share so many other life stories with people that we get excited about, that we have to tell other people about it. What about when you take a trip and you return home? Do you not say another word about it, or do you show pictures and tell stories about the whole thing, even the funny and frustrating details that happen on a trip? Right? It's not enough to just experience the trip yourself. We want to share. Sports fans. Do we have any here? Yeah, a little bit. Sports fans, right? You witness a great play in a game, and you share it with each other. Even if you're sitting next to each other, each giving their own version. It's not enough to just watch the game. You have to tell someone about it, even if they saw that very same game. It's the same with movies, with books, with TV shows, with dining experiences, recipes. We share this and so much more with others in our life. Telling is experiencing. It's reliving the experience as we are kind of giving it to someone else so they can get a glimpse of what we experienced. That's why storytelling is so important when we lose a loved one. We sit down with family and friends and we remember the stories. I will always remember when I was in clinical pastoral education as part of my seminary experience. So back in 2005, 2004, and I was working in Lehigh Valley Hospital in Pennsylvania as a chaplain, and I was called to my first ICU with a family where they were going to remove life support. The first time that I've ever been with people I didn't know, to be with them during this experience. So I walk in the room and I remember they asked for prayer. So we held hands, we prayed together, and then we just kind of sat quietly together. But then I remember everything shifting when I asked a question. I asked the question of the spouse. And all of a sudden there was all these stories started being shared. All I said was, "Can you tell me something about your husband?" And she and her daughters, they started sharing the funny pranks that he used to pull and pranks that, he would do nice things for other people, but they'd never know who it was from. And this mood of the room changed from grim to not grim as they were sharing the life of their loved one. Another example, different but similar, my mom died when I was 22 years old, and my oldest daughter, Stephanie, was 7 months old, and my second daughter, Sarah, was born 3 years later. But both Stephanie and Sarah know my mother to a point, right? They refer to her as Grandma Ruth because of all the stories that we've shared through the years and pictures. And when we sit around the holiday tables with my brothers, their uncles, you share the stories. Well, the stories in the Bible are no different. They have been relived and retold for centuries, and they still live on. And it all started with people like you and me sharing their stories, their experiences. In fact, the Gospels are all about telling the stories of their experiences with encounters with Jesus. You know, several weeks ago, a few of you might remember this, that were here, I talked about John the Baptist and how he pointed some of his own disciples and said, "There's Jesus, the Lamb of God." And a few of those disciples went and started following Jesus. And Jesus turned around and said to them, "What do you want?" Remember that? We had those questions. What do you want? Well, one of those disciples in Scripture that was following Jesus was Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. Well, the first thing Andrew did was go back and tell his brother, Simon Peter, "We have found the Messiah." And he took him to Jesus. And of course, we know Peter's story. He ends up witnessing to so many people. He becomes such a bright light that he is called the foundation on which the church is built. If it wasn't for John the Baptist pointing towards Jesus and Andrew going and, grabbing his brother and taking him to introduce him to Jesus, I wonder how things would have read differently in our Gospels. If people had just kept Jesus like a big secret, just keeping the love and the grace, the unconditional love and the forgiveness to themselves, there would be no New Testament. The New Testament is filled with the stories and letters that people shared with one another. And they relived it because they told it. You know what it's like to tell of something. You're like reliving it, and that person picks up that enthusiasm. They had to tell others. So in the gospel lesson we heard Bob read this morning in Luke, Jesus sends out 70 people. And it should be noted that 70, scholars believe, was a meaningful number because they believe there were 70 Gentile nations. So there's like this whole numerology in the Bible, and that's just one of those numbers. And Jesus sends them out 2 by 2 to the non-Jewish community, right? To proclaim the good news. He sends them to go into the towns, to witness, and to go without any provisions, trusting God will provide. There's a similar passage in Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew, where Jesus just sends out his disciples, sends them to the Jewish community, right? And this was just like one step further. 70 people sent out to the non-Jewish community. But in both cases, they were to rely on God for all of their material possessions. Take no food or clothing or money, and no bag. And that's a whole nother sermon, really. But think about how we can rely on God to give us the words or the actions to take when sharing our faith stories. Right? So let me ask you a question. And if you feel comfortable enough to raise your hand during each of these questions, please do. Are you ready? Okay. When is the last, so have you recently shared medical information or test results with someone else? Right? Yeah. Have you taken a trip and shared details with other people? Have you seen a good movie and told others about it? Read a good book and had to share with other people? Did you share a family story in the last year? Have you shared an incident at work or an incident while you were driving in the past 6 months? And by the way, I got stopped for speeding on the way home from the fair last Sunday. Then you were doing 57 and a 35. Oh. By the grace of God, I deserved the ticket. I deserved the the ticket. I got a verbal warning, and I didn't use I didn't say anything, I just said, I'm sorry. That's all I said. That's all I said. Right, but we like sharing those kinds of things, right? You purchased something and you told someone else about it, because you just loved it so much. When's the last time you shared with someone how God has moved in your life? Right? Some, yes. Because you were in Bible study. I saw you. Of course you did. Of course you shared. Of course. We are called to be witnesses, which is just a fancy way to say we are called to tell our God stories. Just like in the first century, we are called to share our story in word and in deed. When we share how God moves in our lives, how He's blessed us, how in times He's helped us through and given us strength, that we experience that peace that surpasses understanding, times when we are down and God has lifted us up out of the miry pit. When we share these stories with other people, we are planting seeds. We're helping them even think about God. People go years without even thinking about their spiritual life and how God might be working in the world. We are perhaps helping them reconnect, or helping them think about how God is working in their life, maybe. I'm sure Andrew did not expect Peter to become such a prominent figure throughout the centuries when he grabbed him to come along to meet Jesus, when he told him. But if it wasn't for Andrew, a disciple we really know very little about and hear very little about, he's definitely more of a background person. But if it wasn't for him, Peter may have never developed into the person he became through Jesus Christ. So those of you who say, well, I'm quieter, I'm in the background, I like to stay back here. Well, so is Andrew. Right? It's not enough to just watch the sports game, see the movie, read the book, take the trip. We have to tell others about our experiences so we can relive it and they can experience it through us. It's not enough to have a personal relationship with God, just to have the unconditional love of God, the forgiveness and the grace for ourselves. We need to tell others about our experiences so that we can relive it and keep that enthusiasm and others can experience it through us. So the best way to start this, and you're not going to like this, I know. That's okay. But the best way to start doing this is to practice. To practice in a safe place. You know where I'm going with this? This is a safe place. Right? Right here, right now. You are with other believers, with other like-minded people. It is here that we can begin to practice sharing our faith stories with one another so that then we can share them outside the walls of the church. So, I'm going to ask, as a response to the word, by the way, that was the message, amen. As a response to the word, I'm going to ask that you share, if you feel led, if you feel led, to share just something of how you've seen God move in your life. And it can be something, it doesn't have to be a gigantic story. I'm going to start by sharing something of nature, how God spoke to me through nature. And then I'm going to be quiet. And then it's going to be your turn. And you can stand up where you are. You can remain seated if your knees are going to be too wobbly to stand because you're so nervous. Or you can come up here where the microphone is, wherever you are comfortable and whoever feels led. So, a while ago. If I had to guess, 15 years ago. A girlfriend and I, we were going to go to a spiritual retreat for a day, and it was on different forms of prayer. And we really wanted to go, and it was icing. It was like February, and there was like an ice storm in our area, in the Poconos. So I was like, oh, are we not supposed to go? I thought, well, she lives close enough where I can try to get to her house, and then we'll decide. So as I'm driving to her house, I am praying, like, Lord, are we supposed to go? Are we not supposed to go to this? And as soon, like the instant that I am thinking, I don't even know if I said it out loud or I was just thinking it, a male cardinal, you know how bright red they are, flew so close in front of my windshield I could see it had a twig in its mouth. Just at that moment I asked that, it's like, whew. I knew somehow that it was going to be okay, that we should go. I can't really explain it other than that's what I experienced. I went, I told my girlfriend about it, she's like, oh my goodness, that's so cool. So we get in the car, we drive maybe 3 or 4 miles, and a little treacherous, and it rained the rest of the way. Just rained. All the way there, about an hour away, all the way home later. Just rained. Right? So that's like, to me, it was a God moment. I've never had a cardinal fly like that before or after in front of my windshield ever. So, I just want to share that a little bit with you. So now I open it up. And I ask, I'm going to sit over here. And I just ask if anyone feels led to share. And we're going to take, I know it's 5 after 11, but I didn't get to do my sermon until 1:15. I looked at my watch. So we have a few minutes. But I will not let it go over 10 minutes, because then next week we could share more if people really want to start sharing. And guess what? You don't only have to share it up here. When we go down to fellowship time, we don't have to just talk about the weather and the storm that came through this week. We can talk about our faith stories. Okay, go. Anybody? All right. Yay, for courage.
Bible study, I talk too much.
No.
I had something kind of cool last year. My dad always travels to Florida in the winter, and for some reason I was driving to school that morning, and normally I'm singing along to the radio because it's the only time I get without kids, because I'm a teacher, so there's kids at home and there's kids at work, and it's crazy. So I'm all of a sudden like, gosh, I feel like I should pray for safe travels for my dad. They're heading home from Florida to Maine. And so I prayed for safe travels for my dad, and then I went about my day as if, okay, that was fine. And then when I talked to my dad that night, he told me how there was a car accident right in front of him, and he was hauling his camper, and he had to swerve, and cars were all, there was like a pile up in front of him, and he had to swerve. He doesn't know how he made it around the accident, really, hauling his camper, and he's in his 70s, so his reaction time isn't quite what it used to be, and he said, I don't even know how I made it around. And I said, Dad, you're not going to believe this, but I felt compelled to pray for you this morning, and I'm not saying it's just because of my prayer, but something moved me to pray for you, and I did, and you're saved, and so we gave thanks for that.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you.
No, somebody else has to go.
Kimberly broke the ice. Okay.
I was married when I was 19. I'm not going to tell you how many years ago that was. But my husband and I decided, I think it was a year and a half later, something like that, that we would travel to Pennsylvania from Iowa with all our possessions in a U-Haul trailer and store the stuff in his uncle's garage while we went to a wedding there and looked for a place to live on a college campus. So I grew up in Iowa. Our wedding was a pretty tame event. We had the reception in the basement of a church, and it was very lovely. We had cake and coffee. It was a pretty tame event. And when we got to Snowshoe, Pennsylvania, which is where his uncle lived, they said, well, you know, our daughter's getting married, so you're invited to the wedding. And I'm really a fish out of water at that point. I'm definitely a stranger in a foreign land. And we went to the wedding. It was in a roller skating rink. There was a polka band there. And there was lots of festivities, if you get my drift. And I, at this point, was like, I am really afraid. So I did what I was taught to do growing up and what I always resort to. I went outside and prayed, God, you got to help me out here because I have no idea what I'm doing, where I'm going to live. I am extraordinarily, really, really anxious. I went back into the wedding party, and a little old man, he must have been 80, about my height, came up to me and said, you need to learn how to do the polka. So I spent the rest of the night having fun doing the polka. And it was just such a great answer to prayer. I just felt like God was working through this little old man, whose name, oddly enough, was David Drexel, which is my husband's name.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you. All right. I won't let you squirm too long. But remember, right? Safe place. When you're one-on-one with people, it's good to share, you know, your faith stories with family, friends, people that you already know, so that when you do come upon someone, you don't have to use a lot of God language, right? You can just tell a story, like that traffic, you know, like getting pulled over by the police officer. When I would tell that story to someone I didn't know, I would say, you know, I deserve the ticket, but you know, I honestly believe by the grace of God, I just got a verbal warning, right? That's giving God the credit. It's just as simple as that. Okay. So, let us sing our closing song together.